Welcome to the Centre for Brexit Studies YouTube channel. Today we're joined by Centre researcher David Hearne. So David, more than 140,000 firms have applied for help to pay their wage bill through the government's job retention scheme, which went live on Monday. But many more than that are expected to be furloughed due to the lockdown within the next few weeks. Is there a risk that many of the furloughed workers may actually end up losing their jobs further down the line, or is this a mostly temporary measure?
Well, I think as far as we can ascertain, the 140,000 firms employ between them well over 1 million people. So there are already 1 million people who have, on their behalf, had that applied for. As you say, the final number is likely to be many, many more. Some estimates have said almost half of the UK's employee workforce could be furloughed under the measures, which is frankly astonishing. In any event, we're talking about vast numbers of people. I think it's natural that there's concern over the longer term ramifications of this. My understanding of the scheme as it stands is that you can't furlough someone and then immediately lay them off. That's not supposed to be how it works. The entire idea is to protect jobs. That being said, it's obviously going to be the case that there will be a lot of firms, even if they don't furlough their staff, who will find in 6 or 12 months' time that financial conditions have been tough for a long period, and that they just might not be able to afford their workforce anymore. And of course, this doesn't help those who are in firms that go under.
So Rishi Sunak's furlough support scheme has actually failed to reassure Britons, with perceived job security at the lowest level ever in the IHS market survey this week. What more do you think the government could be doing to support and reassure workers, or is it simply just too much of an uncertain time to predict whose jobs will be safe and whose won't be?
I think it depends on what you mean by reassure. So it's certainly going to be very, very difficult to reassure people that their specific job will be around forever. That's not feasible, and that's not true even outside of the current crisis. Recessions come and go, and we certainly do experience periods where significant numbers of people are made unemployed, often through no fault of their own. That isn't going to stop, and there's a limit to what anybody, even the Chancellor of the Exchequer, can do regarding that. However, and it is a big however, the government, whilst it can't necessarily give guarantees and can't reassure people about a specific form of employment, can certainly do more in terms of guaranteeing to them that they will not become destitute, that people will know that even if the worst happens and they don't, and for whatever reason they lose their jobs, that they will not lose their home, that they will not, be cast onto the scrap heap, or however you want to, because people are afraid, very understandably afraid, of losing their income. I think that's true of everybody, and the government certainly could implement a scheme like a basic income to eliminate that fear amongst the populace at large.
So employers are warning of a grim summer for recent graduates, as firms such as Lloyds, HSBC, BDO are being forced to make changes to their recruitment plans because of the ongoing crisis. What impact could this have on youth employment this year and maybe into next year as well? And do you think it's going to be really tough for young people to get jobs?
Yeah, it's horrendous. It's going to be absolutely horrendous. We've already, obviously working in higher education, you speak to some of our undergraduates and they're very worried, and understandably and rightly worried, that they won't be able to get a job after the summer, not because of anything they've done, but because actually the economic situation means that nobody is hiring. People are not hiring, and all of these schemes are designed to protect workers who would otherwise be laid off, and that's wonderful and it's very important and it's a good thing and it needs to happen. But if you're trying to break into the labour force, or you've been recently made redundant, or you're trying to get a new job, and suddenly that's all evaporated in front of you, then yeah, that's a hugely difficult position to be in. And I feel a huge amount of sympathy for graduates. I was in a very similar situation myself when I graduated. I graduated into the middle of the worst financial crisis the world has seen in about 60 years, just over a decade ago. And you know, it was a very, very, very tough time for us. And I think this year's graduates have potentially got it even worse. And just to follow on as an addendum, I don't think this is a problem that will go away later on this year. I think the financial hit from this is going to be substantial and long lasting. So I actually think that it will be a problem for next year's cohort and potentially the ones afterwards as well. All I can say is do what we had to do, which is upskill as far as you can.
And so 1.3 million European citizens waiting for their permanent right to settle in the UK could actually risk being refused unemployment benefits throughout this crisis. What help do you think these people need from the government?
Yeah, I read the article that made that point, and it's difficult to know how widespread this problem really is. The fundamental answer is that, at least in theory, the 1.3 million should have equal treatment with citizens of the United Kingdom. However, there are certain derogations for social assistance, and they're contained within the EU directive to which the treaty refers. The withdrawal agreement being the treaty, and the directive that is referred to is Directive 2004/38/EC. So that's 15 years old now. And there are certain sort of measures and derogations that mean that in not all circumstances are individuals entitled to social assistance, which is probably what's being referred to here. It's hard to know whether these individuals genuinely fall in that bracket, or whether the DWP have made a mistake in terms of wrongly refusing them benefits. The DWP is not infallible and has been known to make mistakes in the past. So it will be interesting to I know on the European side there's a degree of scepticism and concern over whether the UK government will fully adhere to international treaties. But I think it's important to stress that fundamentally these individuals should be protected under, I believe, Article 23 of the withdrawal agreement. But they should have the right to equal treatment, notwithstanding, as I say, the various derogations within the EU directive to which this refers. I know that Article 7 of that directive explicitly lays out some of those derogations. Generally, if you've been living in a host state and you're made unemployed, certainly for over 12 months, then automatically you should be entitled to social assistance, as you would expect for a national of that state. That will definitely apply. Whether there's a slightly more generous situation for those who've been there less than a year is more complicated and difficult to say. It very much depends on specific status. If you're self-employed, then you certainly have the same rights as a citizen, or you should do. So for individuals that fall into that category, there's really very little question. But as I say, it's difficult to ascertain what has gone wrong here. Those with pre-settled status should be entitled to certain protections as are specified under Article 23 of the withdrawal agreement. The real question is, what's not being mentioned here? Is it that those individuals are very, very recent arrivals, been here perhaps 3 months? Or are we talking about people who've been here a year or more, who actually are being wrongly refused benefits to which they are legally entitled? And I don't know which of those two situations, possibly a combination of both of them, apply, and what the specific entitlement to social assistance in the UK in particular, because a huge amount will depends on the exact system used by a member state, and this is where sort of some of the more complicated issues around freedom of movement have come into play when the UK was an EU member, and also for other EU states, which is different states apply the rules slightly differently. Different states have different social assistance programs and different levels of eligibility. That applies to their own citizens as well as to EU citizens more broadly. The UK approach has generally been quite an open approach, such that most of the, to a large extent, most of the provisions of Article 7 under the directive have seemingly not been rigorously enforced while the UK was a member state. I wouldn't expect that, or I wouldn't want that to change. There's a wider issue as well, which is that in any event, and I suspect that almost all of those 1.3 million citizens, 1.3 individuals are legally entitled to more or less the same level of benefits as a UK national. So that's the law. If they're not being given that, then something's probably gone wrong there. As I say, there might be certain individuals who fall outside that scope, but I would imagine quite a few. I'm sorry that's been quite a long-winded answer, but it's quite a complicated topic. The upshot in terms of what the UK government is likely to need to do, well, ultimately, if it fulfills its legal obligations, the overwhelming majority of individuals will be treated like a UK national, I would have thought. I can imagine very few of them where the derogations would apply. And to be honest, even fewer where you'd want them to apply in this particular scenario. You know, we need people not to feel pressured to go into work, to quote the jargon, to stay home, protect the NHS and save lives. We need people not to be working, and therefore, you know, you need to be quite careful in terms of, or at least not working, you know, going out onto the streets and feeling pressured to work in that capacity. A bit different if you're working at home like us. So I think the UK government will want to be very careful, but first and foremost, they need to ensure that they're adhering to the law.
Thank you for joining me, David, and best wishes to those watching.
Thank you.